and in 2009 he was appointed Chief Election Commissioner. So the landmark 2009 general elections were held under his supervision. He also supervised and oversaw a number of key state elections. All of this experience and insights Mr. Chawla brings to Every Vote Counts, his new book. And as Satyajit mentioned, the elections are around the corner. They start in about 3 weeks' time. We are reading about them all the time in the newspapers. We are watching programs on TV. Much of the discussion is about the political side of it. Who's going to come to power? How many seats? All of that. What often goes unnoticed is what goes on behind the scenes. This is the world's largest electoral system, largest electoral exercise, and an immense amount of work and care goes into actually carrying out elections here. I mean, it's not just the general elections, but assembly elections in the states, when by-elections happen, all of those, immense amount of work goes into it, immense amount of planning goes into it. And that's the inside story of the Election Commission. And who better to tell that story than Mr. Chawla? From whether, okay, I will leave you to read the book if you haven't read it already. So I'm not going to do any spoilers here. But are electronic voting machines actually tamper-proof? What are the challenges when you are conducting elections in the stripped-down state of Jammu and Kashmir? Or let's say, an area where there is severe Maoist insurgency. How does one actually conduct elections there? How does one conduct free or fair elections in a country where a certain percentage of politicians, and this has been proven, do have a criminal record? How does all of this work? There are many other questions, equally interesting, equally fascinating, and I will leave you to read the book for that. But what I'm looking forward to immensely is the rest of this evening, when we are going to be joined by two very eminent personalities. Shri Mohammad Hamid Ansari, ex-Vice President of India, and Mr. N. Ram, Chairman of the Hindu Group of Publications. Thank you both very much for being here with us this evening. And my great pleasure to call on stage Mr. Chawla, Shri Hamid Ansari, and Mr. Ram, for the formal launch of the book. While you are coming up, may I ask two more people to come up on stage. Satyajit Krishna, the GM of Taj New Delhi, once again, please. And Mr. Anand Padmanabhan, CEO of HarperCollins Publishers India. I'm now going to hand it over to the Senator gentlemen to take forward the conversation on the book, on issues around the book. Before I get off the stage, just one request, please do put your cell phones on silent mode so that we can enjoy the evening. Thank you so much. Sorry, we would request Mr. Navin to address the audience, please. And then we'll start the conversation.
Mr. Chawla, Mr. Ram, and friends. Mr. Chawla couldn't have done it all on his own. HarperCollins couldn't have done it all on their own. So this is a classic case of the author and the publisher timing it so well as to bring it within 3 weeks of the actual process which the book talks about. Every word counts. I shall deviate a little by asking a different question. Why does every vote count? Every vote counts because we have, many years ago, given ourselves a system of governance called democracy. And because it is democracy, therefore, the system requires that the rulers of the day should be elected by the voting public. And in this case, a voting public of 900 million, an unbelievable figure. But that's factually correct, and the Chief Election Commissioner is sitting right in front of us, and he will testify. Now, the book is all about the organization of the electoral process, the organization of the actual elections, and he has shed some light on certain areas which can be just be called problem areas. There's one chapter in the book which has the caption, "Where is the Indian democracy going wrong?" And he has said a good bit there in that chapter about certain specific things like fake news, paid news, and other things that the two panelists will talk about. But even before we get to that stage, and my way of looking at it, what is democracy all about? Democracy is about certain values and certain institutions. The values are easily put across, that it is at periodical intervals that the electorate elects their rulers. That's easily done. And over the years, over decades, we have polished that system and made it truly commendable. It is not a simple thing for 900 people to exercise their right to vote, and that too, in this day and age, electronically. But then what is the end product? The end product is reflected in a set of institutions. And it is about institutions that I and many other fellow citizens worry about. What are those institutions? The institutions are elected bodies out of which emerge the actual rulers of the day for specified periods for certain purposes which are publicly proclaimed. Now, therefore, the functioning of those institutions, and first and foremost amongst them are the elected bodies headed by the Parliament of India, then the state assemblies, and then down the line to village panchayats. Are those institutions functioning is the question that I pose to this audience and to everybody else in the country. My answer is that they are functioning very inefficiently. I shall not use harsher language. Why is it so? I'll give you statistical data. There was a time in the 50s, even the 60s, early 70s, when the Parliament of India would meet 90 to 100 days in a year. Today, it is meeting around 60, 65 days. So the time available for the Parliament of India to do its assigned work has been reduced by 80 to 90%. What does that reflect in actual work? The job of Parliament is to hold the executive responsible. And there is a mechanism, a whole set of mechanisms through which the executive is held to be accountable on a daily basis, not once in 5 years, which the book is about. But on a daily basis, whenever the Parliament is meeting, notionally for 100 days in a year, the accountability per day is in the set of questions that are posed every day to Parliament. That's one side. The other side is discussing matters of public interest and matters of public concern. And thirdly, is to express views on proposals for legislation which the executive of the day brings before the elected body, whether it is Parliament of India or the state assemblies. Now, if time available is reduced by virtually 50%, 40%, then it means, one, let me start at the other end. Legislation. Legislation is drafted by experts, supervised by political masters, and the best possible efforts going into it. But who would argue that there can be only view on a set of words which constitute a particular legislation? That there can be only one view and not a second. The reason for debating legislation before approving it is that people from different walks of life express their experience on what a particular piece of legislation will do in actual practice. Now, if the legislation is not debated, if legislation is passed in a hurry, as has been happening quite frequently, then where is the scrutiny? So the scrutiny is being done only partially, sometimes not at all. And one net result of it is that pretty soon, when it becomes the law, somebody runs to the High Court, the Supreme Court of India, and points out the drawbacks. And the whole thing is struck down, so they were lost. That's one side. The second, with great knowledge and experience, every elected institution has a question. There are different kinds of questions, I won't go into those details. The whole idea is to quiz the executive and its actions through sharply focused questions. Now we read again and again, questions are not being asked because the time allocated for questions is being lost, for want of a better word, on other matters. So the executive is not being quizzed through questions. Thirdly, debates on matters of public interest. If the parliament is functioning 100%, then all matters can be debated as they were debated in the 60s and the 50s, 60s, even 70s. Now the subjects which are being debated are fewer and fewer. Which means that the three essential functions of an elected body, and I'm not even talking about state assemblies which sometimes meet for 5 days in a year, 3 days in a year, 10 days in a year. So we have the form of democracy. Do we have the substance of democracy? In my view, the jury is out. And there is one other thing which Dr. Ambedkar had talked about, and it remains a valid question. Is it democracy in name or is it substantive difference? This question was that does every vote which is cast, does it have the same value? The short answer is no. And it cannot happen unless we have a more egalitarian society. Now, you can debate that for a very long time and not come to any conclusions. But my short point which I wanted to make, and I told Chawla, he said I should say my piece, so I've said my piece. That yes, every vote does count, and the book should persuade every citizen of India to go and cast the vote. But having done that, they cannot then go home and forget about it. Because if the institutions for which they have voted are not functioning, then it is not a democracy in actual practice. Thank you very much. That was our agreement, isn't it? I shall go back to my
Thank you so much. Thank you. I will hand it over to Mr. Ram to begin the conversation.
Thank you.
I have loaded, in fact.
Good evening. I thought we'd get that visibility. At a book launch, an inbuilt feature is that most people who come to participate, listen, comment, haven't read the book because a number of books were bought there. So I think I need to say a few words about the book. Every Vote Counts, the Story of India's Elections, is a book that is well timed to launch. It's close to a very important election. But it's not just about this election. And honorable former Vice President, Mr. Ansari, made that point. It's about the process. It's about the process. And so the value of the book is not just tied to immediate forthcoming event, but reflection on the process. And may I say, Navin, you've done, it's a very balanced view, it's a realistic view. You look at what is truly one of the wonders of the world, the great Indian election. And all that goes into it, has gone into it over the years, continues to go into it. The efficiency and the unfailing regularity with which it's held, the fact that it is accepted by winners, of course, and to a large extent by losers as well. Some of them grumble, but they accept it. And when we were discussing it, you said people at large, the people of India accept this. It has a lot of credibility. At the same time, yeah, you introduced technology, and I think it's been a lot of innovations that made a real difference. Notably the electronic voting machine, the photo identity card, EPIC, and so on. These are well recognized, and I think the press, by and large, the media have reported this pretty well. The process, the mechanisms, set of mechanisms, and so on. But you're not shy to recognize the deeper problems which just figured in the chief guest's remarks. What's wrong with our democracy? How are our institutions doing their job? So I think you're quite uninhibited in looking at this. So I think the book is realistic. But just for those who haven't read this, the content of the book, very briefly, the chapters on the great Indian election, what this is all about, the complexity of it, the diversities of India that are reflected in the whole process, and something we can be proud of. The fact that not much, the literature on it is developing, but it's a long way to go before we can say we really understood the process. And this particularly applies to the early elections. And the paucity of reliable material on the work of the early election commissioners, the chief election commissioners, starting with Sukumar Sen. But over time that has improved, and in recent times chief election commissioners have come up with their accounts and reflections on this, on which you can build. And then notes from 2009 where what you call the big one, very challenging, where you were the chief election commissioner, and actually you changed during the process itself. One chief election commissioner finished his term and you took over. So, where is Indian democracy going wrong? Which we just heard, Mr. Ansari. Phenomenon that is of great interest to all of us: paid news, post-truth, and the influence of social media on elections, the electronic voting machine controversies, legal as well as in the public arena, and your take on this. And I just noted that Pranoy Roy, my friend Pranoy Roy, in his new book, The Verdict, is full of, is unstinting in his praise for this, saying it's one of the finest innovations that the Election Commission of India has come up with. That's the conclusion. And that you have a very detailed analysis of this. The challenge of contesting it in Maoist affected areas, your successful election in Jammu and Kashmir in 2008, what went into it, the perennial question of electoral reforms, which we are sorry to say neither Parliament nor the executive branch has taken very seriously, it appears, emerging trends, and a very interesting chapter in which I figure the role of the Chief Election Commissioner, the then Chief Election Commissioner, Mr. Gopal Swamy. He was a man of great experience with respect. There was quite a controversial period where he recommended the removal of his colleague who had equal voting powers, but he just suo motu recommended that he be virtually sacked in the Election Commission. Fortunately, it didn't happen. But the issues raised there and the issues that have not yet been resolved in this respect depends very much on the temperament, the values of the Chief Election Commissioner, rather than any institutional safeguard, it appears. And a charming little chapter on Bhutan, which is an appendix, how democracy was imposed from above and your experience with elections. This is the basic content of the book, just to give you an idea. So we'll start with the paucity of literature. What is the lacuna there? Why do we need to learn more about the process?
Yes, I think this is, when I was starting to research this book, I wanted to see what my predecessors had written, and there was very little about the early years. The first 6 or 7 commissioners hadn't written, they hadn't left any notes. We had 3 of my predecessors, or 2 predecessors and a successor, who did write, and that was a valuable contribution. These included Mr. Seshan, who wrote about his difficulties, but sadly a book out of print, and he's a legendary figure. And then after that we had Mr. T.S. Krishnamurthy writing about democracy and elections. And then we had my successor, Mr. Qureshi, writing about elections too. But I decided that I must pen something of my own experience, not just how elections are run in India, but what were the difficulties that I faced, and what were the strengths that I gained. But having said that, I would like to mention the first Chief Election Commissioner, Mr. Sukumar Sen, because if I were to place myself in his shoes, with no architecture to build on, we all inherited an architecture. My previous boss, Mr. Tandon, is sitting here, and he was there and he guided me when I came into the Election Commission. But were I have to be the first, then where would we start? Where was the manpower? How would we make the first electoral roll of India? Not easy, especially when women at that time wouldn't give their names. They would say, so-and-so ki maa hoon, so-and-so ki behen hoon, so-and-so ki beti hoon.
They were not included.
And they were not included by him in the roll. But I also have to add that when I did that very difficult, I was part of the commission, and I was not the Chief Election Commissioner, but I did have something of a pivotal role in the 2008 very difficult election in J&K. At that time, my predecessor, Mr. Lindo, who had done a 2002 election in J&K, his book actually formed a Bible. It was on my bedside for weeks as I studied it, and his difficulties came very useful for me, and the methods that he used. So I think, to answer your question now, if all election commissioners and chief election commissioners were to write, it's not only about I, it's about contributing to the build-up and strengthening of a very important institution in our country.
The other story, which has just recently been told very well in a fine book by Ornit Shani, an Israeli scholar, how India became democratic. I think she found a gold mine in the record rooms of the Election Commission. It's a story about how a small group of people, under the guidance of Mr. Rao, Ian Rao, the constitutional advisor, the Constituent Assembly, did this marvelous feat of putting together electoral rolls in India. And her basic point is how Indians became voters before they became citizens, because this preceded the adoption, the making of the Constitution itself, the adoption of the Constitution. So that also has to be recognized. But we do hope, since our CEC is here, he perhaps has something in mind about memorializing the contribution of the first Chief Election Commissioner, former ICS officer who got into the IAS and did a wonderful job after this task of preparing the electoral rolls was handed over to him for before the Constitution was adopted. But, so that, I think that's
You're absolutely right, because then we have a road named, he went on to do elections in Sudan. So there's a road in Sudan named, in Khartoum, named after him. And there is something in Shantiniketan named after him, something in Bardwan named after him, but of course he hasn't got the, but he is one of the unknown heroes of my book. I mean, he deserves greater recognition. And indeed, having said that, the second election commissioner was Mr. K.V.K. Sundaram. And I then asked his family members whom I know, that has he left any notes, any diaries, any papers, something? But unfortunately, nothing. So I think that historians must start building up on those early years, because every election commissioner and chief election commissioner has contributed in his, sadly not her, because we had Rama Devi ji, whose daughter is here in the audience, and she was chief election commissioner for a very brief time when she was law secretary. She was in charge. Her daughter Rekha is here. But I have given her recognition in the election commission, but I hope that successive election commissioners do build up.
Now the whole election process has been very well honored and safeguarded in the provision in the Constitution. About the elections, the Election Commission and the Chief Election Commissioner have been given a very high constitutional status, like Supreme Court judges, and given virtually unqualified powers so far as elections are concerned. The Supreme Court judgments have qualified that a little after Mr. Sessions' tenure or during that tenure. And the superintendent's direction and control of the preparation of the electoral rolls for and the conduct of all elections to Parliament and to the legislature of every state. These are strong words, superintendent's direction and control. And also the provision that no court can interfere with the process while it's ongoing and only take it up as an election petition. So what explains the low-key functioning of the early election commissioners, and was it one man's doing or the game changer? Mr. Sessions' great contribution in establishing the independence of the election commission, but also later on what you call his arbitrary functioning, his idiosyncrasies, his treatment of his colleagues, the harsh words he used, and that famous judgment in the Supreme Court, five-judge bench, which I think brought some stability back to the election commission, which is completely dysfunctional at that time. So you can't follow the court, because we can go into the details about the appointment and removal later. But so far as provisioning is concerned, the constitutional provisioning, followed by the statutory provisions, there's nothing to fault during.
Yes, I think not. As I said, I think that each of the chief election commissioners who were at the helm of affairs would have contributed substantially to the functioning of the election commission and the conduct of elections, but not enough is known, and it must be researched. So their proper place in the history of the working of elections deserves recognition. And since Mr. Arora is here, and they have a very good research library, maybe some researchers could be inducted to be able to flesh out their roles. But suddenly, we were all sort of low-key civil servants until Mr. Session came along like a meteor. And suddenly the Election Commission became known. And it happened in a comparatively innocuous way. We are now used to doing elections with large central forces and observers drawn from the civil services. But when Mr. Session made the first request to the Prime Minister of the day, he was met with a cold silence. So he wanted maybe, I think, one company of police force and a couple of observers. But those were early days and he didn't get it. So Mr. Seshan, now being Mr. Seshan, whom I greatly admire in the book, but I also recognize some of the idiosyncrasies, as you say, I decided that he was going to use the ultimate power that a chief election commissioner has, which is that he wouldn't do any further elections. And so there was a terrible standoff between him and the then Prime Minister, Mr. Narasimha Rao. And he said, no, until you don't concede what I want, I'm not going to. And he didn't. And there was consternation in the political firmament of India because there were candidates and there were parties and there was nothing happening. And then he had a famous face-off, which he acknowledges to me because I do go and call on him in Chennai. He's not very well now. And he told Mr. Narasimha Rao that if you think that I'm obliging you by stepping down, I'm not. Nor will I die. And it's not possible for you to easily impeach me because you don't have a majority in Parliament. So Mr. Mr. Narasimha Rao, being very wise, gave in and gave him what he wanted. But it's not easy even for chief election commissioners to take on very astute prime ministers. And so what Mr. Seshan found, and in those days flights used to take quite long, and there were no mobile phones. So one day when Mr. Seshan left from Delhi and landed in what was then called Pune, he was met by hordes of pressmen at the airport in Pune. And they said, what do you think about the 2 new colleagues who've been appointed? So now Mr. Seshan was ringed by 2 colleagues. But in the end, it all worked very well. And I think that we do need 3 members in the commission. 3 are always better than 1, because it's 3 opinions. And after all, these are 3 very well-established civil servants who spent 37 and 38 years rising into the ranks of the civil service till they reach the very top. They're experienced people, so I think 3 has worked well, although it happened as it happened with this sort of face-off.
But it's the Supreme Court which really made that part of the Constitution through its ruling given, making them co-equals, the Chief Election Commissioner and the 2 others, or whoever, whatever the number, and saying they had equal voting powers. That was not originally provision.
And this strangely happened because it wasn't the other 2 who took Mr. Seshan to court, it was Mr. Seshan who went to the Supreme Court and said, why have these 2 people been imposed on me? And he would refer to them in the press in the most unparliamentary sort of way, which I can't possibly quote here because then the Hindu will carry it. But it's somewhere in the book. He went to the court, and it took about a year and 3 months for that judgment to be delivered. And during that time, those 2...
1995.
That's right. And they didn't have any work because he wouldn't give them any. But then the Supreme Court passed an excellent judgment. And in that judgment, it paid them, all 3 of them equal. And in any case, they were getting the same emoluments and salaries and so on. And also said that any 2 can overrule the 3rd. So 2 commissioners could overrule the Chief Election Commissioner, but Mr. Tandon never let that happen in his time. He's sitting here and he's been my boss, because he always worked for unanimity, and he worked with great cooperation, and so there was never any conflict in his time. But of course, I had my share of conflict later. And another former Chief Election Commissioner, Mr. Gill, has just walked into the room, and there he is, to whom I've just referred.
Yeah. So, Mr. Gill, I think...
Mr. Gill, come and please sit in front so that some questions will also be directed to you.
Seems to have played a very constructive role.
Very constructive role,
after
yes.
that traumatic experience of working with Mr. Seshan. By making it work smoothly.
He made it work smoothly.
Now let's look at the role of the CEC in relation to the other election commissioners. Now you say 2 is settled. It's settled as two. It can't be more than two.
No, it can be more than two, and there's really nothing to prevent the government from even abolishing the two, except that the apex court would
Okay,
intervene.
now let's draw a parallel between this. There are some distinguished judges here. Good. So they'll know. Now, let's draw a parallel between this and the Chief Justice of India and his brother judges. Sister judges. Now, we had a little while ago 4 senior-most judges of the Supreme Court of India holding a press conference, basically complaining that case allocation, it's been very arbitrary. But the Chief Justice, of course, says that I'm the master of the rolls. It's correct. I'm not wanting to draw you into that controversy, but just a parallel. Now, CEC, what is the actual function of the CEC in relation to it? He's the first, he's primus inter pares. Yes, that's the quote from the Supreme Court judgment, first among equals. He's the face of the Election Commission of India. He presides over the meetings, but he has just one vote out of 3. The same thing applies to the Chief Justice. The CEC doesn't necessarily allocate by diktat the work of the other election commissioners, does he or she?
No, no longer. If that did happen in Mr. Sessions' time, it evolved also in Mr. Sessions' time. Dr. Gill is here. And it wasn't that there wasn't differences of opinion. There always are, and there must be. If we are 3 people working in the commission, we are not expected to have identical points of view. But as the Supreme Court also pointed out, that the chief, there had to be a chief also so that there was no administrative confusion. But all vital decisions, at least in my time, were taken not just with the 2 commissioners being present, but with all our principal officers and judicial officers also being present. So short of deciding on a date of election, short of that, every decision was one where there would be 12 people in the room and we would debate everything and come to sort of conclusions on how we should run it. So in that sense, it was quite different from the Supreme Court, but much depended on the role that the Chief Election Commissioner of the day plays. I think this sort of harmony began in Dr. Gill's time. So he is witness to that very important part of history. With Prince, he was there. So there are some similarities, but a lot of dissimilarities.
So I think one of the things that comes out of your book is it's very good that there's a multi-member election commission. And there must be collegiality and it will work smoothly. Usually decisions are by consensus, by agreement, although if necessary, it's by voting. That's established. Now let's look at a couple of deeper issues here. One is the appointment of the members of the Election Commission of India. I think it came up during the Constituent Assembly, and Dr. Ambedkar was quoted earlier on another issue. Said that on June 16, 1949, in the debates, and I quote, "My provision," this is about the appointment of the chief election commissioners or other election commissioners. "My provision, I must admit, does not contain anything to provide against nomination of an unfit person to the post of the chief election commissioner or the other election commissioners. I do want to confess that this is a very important question and it has given me a great deal of headache." So they missed a great opportunity, our constitution makers, since the issue was flagged even at that point. They didn't think of a collegium, a broader selection committee or process.
Yes, they didn't. And I think Dr. Ambedkar made another big error, which was also part of the Constituent Assembly debates at that time, because there were at least two other members, Dr. Shibin-Lal Saxena and Dr. Kunzru, who said that even if you co-opt 2 or 3 commissioners to assist the Chief Election Commissioner at the time of an election, nonetheless you must give them the same powers of protection as you give to the Chief Election Commissioner. So their views are recorded in the Constituent Assembly debates, but the consensus apparently was no. So it was assumed that there would only be one chief, and the other 2 would be taken on from time to time if exigency demanded. I think that yes, an opportunity was missed then, and indeed I think an opportunity was missed by the Supreme Court as well in the famous Session judgment. I feel it could have gone the last mile and suggested a collegium to the government.
But that would have stepped too far.
Well,
Supreme Court remaking the Constitution.
Well, the Supreme Court could have suggested it, as it often does. A lot of electoral reforms today have owed themselves to the Supreme Court, not to the executive. So I think that that would have been worthwhile. I know, again, referring to present company, both Dr. Gill and Mr. Tandon, when they were demitting office, wrote to the Prime Minister of the day and said, and these are very important letters, they form a part of our history, they form a part even of our constitutional history, they certainly form a part of our electoral history. And we are fortunate that we have them both here, along with the present chief. And they suggested to the Prime Minister that no, there should be a collegium. It must consist of the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, the Speaker, the Vice President of India, and perhaps a few others. But they both suggested that there should be a collegium system for the appointments. And I would, in this book, had also endorsed that. I never wrote any letter, a separate letter to the Prime Minister in my time, except on another issue in the book. But these stand on record. And unfortunately, no government, whichever it might have been for the last 22 years, has accepted this.
On the other issue of removal, the Chief Election Commissioner is in a par with judges of the Supreme Court. That removal can only be by impeachment, which means it's virtually impossible in our political system, even if it's required on merits. But as for the others, there was a real dispute with Mr. Gopalaswamy, who so motu made a recommendation that you be removed, and you deal with it extensively in the book. Which I think it's really worth, the issues are worth reflecting on. It was rightly rejected by the president, meaning the political government of the day, the Manmohan Singh government. And I think all our top lawyers have taken this position. Mr. Ashok Desai, Ali Nariman, Soli Soramji, K.K. Venugopal, all coming out to say that the CEC has no such powers to make a recommendation because, for obvious reasons, they are co-equals. So, but it is in fact a safeguard if the executive branch wants to remove other election commissioners because they are not protected in the same way the CEC is, then the CEC will protect them. Isn't that the sense?
Yeah. Absolutely, that is the sense, and that is the sense that has been explicitly the opinion of Mr. Ashok Desai, who's here, our former Attorney General, and whose opinion was sought, and his opinion is on file. And he was completely clear that it has to start from the executive has to take this up if it wishes to, and then it has to take the opinion of the Chief Election Commissioner of the day. It can't begin with the Chief Election Commissioner working so motu. But why has this arisen? And this matter is even today before the courts, and it's an important matter for the Election Commission. Its powers, its strength, and its future. It's a very important question because even today in a recent affidavit to the Supreme Court, the government believes that no, the Chief Election Commissioner is the only person who will have constitutional protection. And the other two elections, and today there are two election commissioners, tomorrow there may be three, I dare say, or four, or five. The other election commissioners need not have that protection. But in my distilled view of almost 6 years in the Election Commission, it is this, that this is one of the most important constitutional bodies that safeguard our country and our democracy. It makes us different from our neighbors. It makes us different from many countries that got independence at about the same time that we did from colonial rule. We only have to look around our neighborhood, and I won't name any countries. We only have to look at those countries who also got freedom between 1946 and 1956 to see how stable we are, how we do elections on time each time, that the results are accepted by winners and losers alike, as you mentioned. I have been observer to so many countries in Latin America and others where the results are not accepted. They were not so easily accepted in the US in 2016. Taking all that into consideration, I do feel that the affidavit so recently submitted by the government, that no, the two election commissioners are such that we will appoint them at will, without a collegium. And the Chief Election Commissioner, because they can't touch him any longer, is the only one who remains sacrosanct. And so this was disappointing, but no less disappointing than the position that the government has taken, and whichever government has come in the last 22 years. They're all on par as far as the Election Commission is concerned. So every judge, whether it's in the US or in India, has to be appointed by somebody, by some government. But when you come on to that particular chair, then you can't look left and you can't look right. You can only look to the country, because the country is looking at you. So whether you're a judge in the Supreme Court in the United States, or whether you're a judge in the Supreme Court in India, we are an argumentative people. We analyze carefully. We discuss all the time. We have opinions. We are not silent. We are not afraid of silence. And so, what matters here in India is that yes, if there are 3 commissioners, they must have equal power. They need not look over their shoulder to their boss to see are they pleasing him. And they certainly shouldn't look over the other shoulder to government to say are we doing the right thing. No. So these are decisions that are fortunately still before the Supreme Court, and we must not let them go.
Now, if you could turn to technology and innovations. The Election Commission can be proud of what over the years, what it's been able to achieve. What would you say are the most significant or valuable adoptions of technology or innovations?
Well, many. We've always been in the forefront. The electronic voting machine, on which there will be opinions, is one. Most recently...
Tell us more about it.
The EVM. Well, there is this controversy that arises from time to time. It's not that it's only just arisen, it arises from time to time. And sometimes what tends to happen is that the candidate who loses, or the party that loses, is quick to blame the electronic voting machine, and rather than their own machinery. So, but the electronic voting machine has faced many trials before practically all the high courts in our country. Kerala, Maharashtra, the Bombay bench, Karnataka, Delhi, the Supreme Court, and so many fine minds have analyzed the efficacy of this machine. I hold firmly that it cannot be wired into with anything else. It's like your pocket calculator. It's programmed to be like a calculator. It can't be wired to your computer. The moment we concede NRI voting rights in another country, we would have to go into a computer-based operation, and then the efficacy of this machine will no longer stand, which is why we haven't conceded that. So I firmly believe that, that this machine can't be tampered with, and the Election Commission has had 2 hackathons, one in my time and one again in 2017, where people were invited into a hall and said, okay, hack away and show us, and nobody could.
There are several other issues in the book. The Model Code of Conduct, MCC, and I think they've added to it now with the voluntary code adopted by social media, which is in the Election Commission's website. We just had a chance to look at it. And the whole question of turnout, which has been increasing, particularly in rural India, and women turning out in larger and larger numbers. It's a very good thing. But you were mentioning earlier when we were chatting that in Orissa and West Bengal, 2 very interesting things have happened, not by the Election Commission, but by, of all things, by political parties.
I think that is perhaps the most positive development that has taken place in the last few weeks. That 2 major political parties, in this case the TMC in West Bengal, spearheaded by Mamata Banerjee, and Navin Patnaik, spearheading it in Odisha, have reserved 1/3 of their seats for women. I think this is perhaps the most exhilarating decision that has taken place, and I do hope that other political parties do follow suit. Of course, there have been proposals by the Election Commission, by Dr. Gill in particular, to political parties that, all right, at least nominate people in your political parties, at least 1/3 of them should be women. But I think with these 2 steps, I'm sure others will, maybe not for this election, but I think that they will move forward there. So that's a very positive step.
I'll just flag one more issue and then we'll open to questions, comments, and so on. The role of social media, your chapter on post-truth and the impact of social media on elections. Now, India has the largest number of Facebook users in the world. I just looked up the data, over 300 million now. Yeah. And it's estimated to go up. As for messaging apps, WhatsApp, even a larger number, and then you have Instagram, Twitter. So it cuts both ways. Social media have contribute positively, but what seems to be happening is a lot of fake news, a lot of hate messages out there, fake polls. If you know your 48-hour rule, nothing should be, no campaigning 48 hours before the time of voting. How do you prevent the social? What weapons are in the armory of the Election Commission to act against the social media if they flagrantly defy the Election Commission's directive on this? And then
I'm very tempted to pass the mic on to the present Chief Election Commissioner, but he's a member of the audience and a friend, and I don't want to embarrass him, but I'll tell you what I think I know. For me, it's the way I see it, it's the single biggest challenge today. I didn't have it in 2009, and it wasn't there in the general election of 2014. So we were all spared the problems. We earlier saw it as, I saw it as a wonderful tool to educate, to guide, but now it's working in reverse, and how do we prevent it? So the Election Commission had set up a committee. It was then under Mr. Umesh Sinha, who is also in the room somewhere, one of our senior most officials in the Election Commission. It gave its report, but since then, the Chief Election Commissioner, taking cognizance of this major problem, perhaps the biggest problem today, has called in all the social media platforms and said that we're going to have a code of conduct for you. And that code of conduct will be such that these are the do's and don'ts that will apply as the MCC, the Model Code of Conduct, applies to the print media and applies to the electronic media. It would also apply to the social media. Now it's complaint-based. So if one of us in the audience decides to write into the Election Commission and say that, look, this is going on Twitter, or this is there on Facebook, which is clear violation of the Code of Conduct, also clear violation of the law of the land, of the law of India, to spread communal hatred, for example, or to incite castes against one another, then in that case...
you mean section 126 of the Representation of People Act and also IPC?
As well as the IPC. Now, how it'll actually play out is, I hope, in very competent hands. It's very difficult because when you have hundreds of thousands of Twitter messages, so many Facebook posts all over the place, how many people, then WhatsApp.
Would be deadly.
Yes, and then all of us here in the room knew what happened in 2016 in the US election, where it was alleged that Russia interfered with the election. And I have the statistics that I drew from the very respected Economist magazine, and I quote them for the number of Facebook posts, the number of Twitter, and so on. But this is not confined to any one election. Now this is global. Anyone can interfere with anything. There are no geographical boundaries left to respect. So it's a huge challenge. And before we end this evening, I would request your permission that you might ask Mr. Arora, because this is a very erudite audience here, and it's not an everyday occasion that we have the present Chief Election Commissioner in the hurly-burly of elections to be with us for this hour. I'm very grateful, sir, for you being here. And if later, after the questions, you might ask him, because he could answer, I think, better than
Later
or now, as you like. Now he doesn't know, poor man, that he was going to be into this, but this is a very pertinent question.
Would you like to come up?
Sir, this is the use or misuse of scenario.
Seniority.
On the social media side, we have been in talks with them for the last 7 to 8 months. Based in my colleague sitting here, committee was formed. Now, before you get any ideas about the committee, I would like to clarify 2 small points. Having been in the government for over 36 years, I've also been, like most of my seniors, I'm afraid of 2 words: agree in principle. Far more than that, a subcommittee has been appointed. But this committee under Mr. Ramesh Sinha was not one of those committees. You see, Section 126 of the Representation of People Act, it includes print, it includes electronic media. Print media over a period of time has already developed a regulatory mechanism by way of PCI. You may have opinions about PCI, but it's very much there. Similarly, electronic media, by a combination of judgments of the courts and the kind of efforts of the successive PCIs, they have also now their own federations, and they have even appointed a honorable retired Supreme Court judge to kind of look into very specific issues. On the social media side, when Sinha committee gave the report, it was very specific. And the report was to say that print media as well as other entities included social media, should be included in the ambit of Section 126. So that proposal was sent, it required to be sent for approval to the ministry. In the meanwhile, we are also engaging with them parallelly in small groups as EC members. And about a week back, we had a very in-depth interaction with them. All the heads of social media and the apex organizations were there. We did not tell them a code of conduct. We in fact requested them. It was a very, I shouldn't be saying it, but I need to say it, a kind of iron fist with a velvet glove kind of meeting. The presentation which we gave to them, it showed them various provisions of IPC. There are some friends from social media must be here, so I'm still saying it. We also showed them some the existing laws, etc., etc. And then we told them that we are fully aware that at the moment we don't have laws in that sense. However, as electronic media has done, and above all, we gave them the example of model code of conduct. We said this is a unique document, which it is. I mean, all the political parties who kind of fight with each other, gracefully or desperately or whatever, they all came together to observe this model code of conduct. And two slides in our presentation to them were devoted to model code of conduct. After that, we told them that now we should divide our meeting into two parts. Part one, what we can do for this elections. Part two, a long-term thing. So I'm glad to say they all responded. And the next day, initially they came with their own bureaucracies, our legal department is in, we have to take permission from Washington, New York, whatever. So we all have these days, across the time zones, we all have ways of communicating. Okay, we'll give you a paper called Way Forward, there's nothing doing. The only thing we said, requested them to give it to us is that no way forward, say a code of ethics. And I'm glad to report to you, sirs, that, and members of the audience, that they have given us a code of ethics. And that is now available on the ECA website. Anybody can see it. Now the question is, how do we implement it? That question is also still there in model code of conduct. So it will be a kind of situational basis. Suppose there is a message which kind of has the potential to spark a communal riot. There will be one way of implementing it. It's a kind of objectionable poster. There will be another way of implementing it. And another thing that they have done is that each of the mediums have already appointed a kind of grievances officer, nodal officer, with whom we will have a nodal officer in the ECI, and the two will be in touch for X medium, AA, or B medium, BB, so on and so forth. So it's a kind of leap of faith, certainly not a leap in the dark. And we do hope that we'll be able to kind of do something about it in this very election itself.
I'm sure there are questions on money power and misuse, the blatant violation of spending limits, and also criminality and muscle. Although good capturing, you say, has clearly come down with the introduction of EVMs.
So that's been eliminated, I think.
Please, sir, would you like questions or comments? Please.
May I?
We'd appreciate it if you introduce yourself. Mike. Mr. Chawla.
Good evening. I'm Indira Basu and I work with the Quint. And my question to you, sir, Mr. Chawla, is is it not a violation of the Model Code of Conduct to release a film like Narendra Modi on the Prime Minister just days before the election? Of course, I understand that it's not funded by a political party. I know that it's independently done and it's by, a Bollywood filmmaker, and everybody has their own, means of expression and right to do so. But regardless, should there not be, a clause which prevents this from happening? Because a film like that can influence many.
But I don't know. Personally, I don't know whether it can influence any more than all the electioneering that goes on in the country by all political parties, prime ministers, and former prime ministers included. So when you are free to electioneer and speak anything, as long as it's not violative of the Model Code of Conduct, personally I see no harm in any biopic on anyone, but just as long as the contours and the rules are maintained.
Thank you.
The Model Code of Conduct comes into force when the election schedule is announced, right?
Yes, immediately. Professor Banerjee, please a mic to her.
My name is Professor Surabhi Banerjee. I'm from Kolkata, and I sit at 3 universities in this country, and I don't have any question. I just want to make a few comments and observations because I've read the book. And I thank Mr. Ram for giving a sort of preamble and introduction to the contents of the book. And yes, every vote counts. And unlike in any essayistic narrative, any non-fiction, it opens with a sort of anecdotal reference to a solitary voter, the Bharatdarshan Pujari in Gujarat. And the election commission knocked at his door so that he can exercise his right. Now, I would say that it's an extremely well-researched book, and soon it's going to be one of the seminal books on not only the story of India's elections, the stories of the charged world. I think it's a history and evolution of India's elections. We know about yesterday, and also what is happening today, and some suggestions and recommendations there are in the book for tomorrow, future. And the book is equally important, I feel, when I come to the end of the book, for people like us who are sort of awed and intrigued by the gigantic machinery, the electoral machinery of the great Indian election, and how it operates, the inner workings, the inner wheels of the machine. And at the same time, it's also equally important for the researchers, because I don't think that any researcher can complete his work without reading this book. Political history, political science, and story of Indian elections. Another thing I'd like to mention here, that's towards the end of the book, you've enumerated, you've given a list of your suggestions on how to hold elections or not hold elections in the Maoist affected areas. Now, 2009, a major landmark in my life also, because I took the assignment as the Vice Chancellor of the Central University of Orissa in Koraput. And that is, how it is affected by this, these incidences. And I was there on the day, and I witnessed so many things. It's the first time in my life. But you have, enumerated a few things that should be done. And one of them is that either you don't hold elections or the normal machinery, you don't use the normal machinery, or you have spatially trained personnel or spatially trained forces to hold such elections. So I just need a little more clarification of that. And my last point is that I really like the perspective. It is a non-fiction, and it's very realistic. The realistic movies are very much as Mr. Ram said. But at the same time, it is, it has got a perspective. And I think this perspective emerges from, the author's working as the Chief Election Commissioner of his first-hand experience is a living primary source of the book, and at the same time, outside, how the way he interacted with the common people, the common people, and that voice, those voices are there. So it makes it sort of multi-layered. So it makes delectable reading. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming from you, Professor Surabhi Banerjee, that is high praise. Thank you.
So I think the point that the book does not romanticize Indian elections, I think is well taken. Yes. Dr. Gill, would you like to say something? No questions on the blatant violation of rules, law, election on spending limits? Yes?
Hi, I'm Sancheta.
You'll get a mic.
Hi, I'm Sancheta Gajapati Raju. Mr. Chawla, I have a question for you. Like we all agree, the primary role of the Election Commission is to ensure that we have free and fair elections. And like you said, money power is a very, it's a reality that we all know about. While there is a cap on spending for candidates, there is no cap on what political parties can spend. And don't you think that vitiates the entire atmosphere because it's not a level playing field? So what do you think about that?
No, I wholly agree with you. And I'd even go one step further and say that the way that political parties collect their funds and have collected them right from the 70s onwards, we need much more sunlight on them. And it's not just in India. I find that in practically every country where I have been observer, there isn't enough sunshine on the way money is collected and the way money is spent. But here, you raised a very important point, which is that insofar as spending by political parties on publicity, on travel, and so on, there is no limit. So this is a huge lacuna, and it does need one day to be addressed.
I think Mr. Ansari has.
May I withdraw without disturbing?
There's another. Thank you very much. One more thing to follow up. Electoral bonds. This innovation came in the Finance Act of 2017. My contention is electoral bonds make kickbacks legal, enable legal kickbacks because the identity of the donor is protected. Far from making it more transparent, it makes it more opaque. And this is a very unfortunate thing because now, except that you can't pay by cash, digital payments or payments by check can be made without disclosing the identity of the donor. In the previous law, you had to disclose the name of the party to which you make a donation in your profit and loss account. Now you don't. You just have to say how much you paid to political parties in general. That doesn't look like progress, does it?
Well, I don't think electoral bonds have worked, but I think the last word is yet to be written. But I go beyond electoral bonds because and as Sancheta had said, the big problem that we are facing is really of money power. It's estimated that the 2014 election didn't just cost the government, but the spending all around was close to $4 billion. It's guesstimated that it might double this time. So we're talking about very large sums of money. And not all, and electoral bonds is just one tiny slice. We will have to look at the figures when they're given to the Election Commission after this election, that which political parties or how have they been accounted for. But if it was meant to address the problem, of course it has not succeeded. I'm not sure it was meant to address the problem, because big money has a way of being spent and seems to violate the rules, whichever commission might write them. And I have seen this in so many countries, that there are ways of beating the system, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in Latin America, there are many ways. So I think that that is a problem.
So thank you. I think there's much more in the book, and I invite you to, those who follow elections, to read it. And I repeat, this book is not just for the moment. I think it's about the process and addresses questions, deep questions, seriously, and it's balanced. It neither romanticizes elections nor gives us a very bleak picture. I think it's a very realistic and honest account, and I commend our chief election commissioners, many of them, for being very forthcoming with their views in office and also after they step down. I think on the whole, it's something you can be proud of, and I think it has a lot of public support.
Thank you, Mr. Ram. Thank you, Mr. Chawla, for a wonderful discussion. I'm sure all of you enjoyed it and gave all of you a lot of food for thought. Thanks also to Mr. Hamid Ansari, who had to leave, of course, he had an engagement, but for being here and presiding.